allow me to share the screen?
Yes. Oh. Let me give you that. There we go.
Okay. All right. Hi, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So just give me just a second. Okay. And then. Okay. Ria, can you just give me a thumbs up if you guys see the screen okay and hear me? Okay, awesome. Well, thank you guys for having me here today. My name's Hannah Rogers, and I've been an intervention specialist for the last couple years, and I'm now working for Ohio State. And I'm hoping to get back to the classroom when I'm done working for OSU. My real passion is working with students with multiple disabilities, students who are non-speaking, and training paraprofessionals, teachers, and educators on how we can best support our students with disabilities. So just a little bit of my background and where my passions lie are AAC and students who are non-speaking, and also ethical and holistic behavior support. I'm really interested in disability advocacy and training. I think that all teachers are out there doing the best that they can, and all students really do deserve access to high quality education. And I know that we can do that by ensuring staff have the training and information they need to be successful. Before I dive into the presentation, I just want to take a moment and say thank you for being here and thank you for the work that you do. I want to acknowledge that being a paraprofessional, being a teacher, being a support staff is a hard job, and your work is really valued. You guys spend as much time with students as teachers do. So paraprofessionals, you have that same impact that teachers have. Support staff, you have that same impact that teachers have. And your job is valued, your job is appreciated, and you have the power and opportunity to make a difference. So I hope today that I can share some ways that we can ensure that you make that a positive one. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and go over the learning targets for today. Our goal today is just to adjust our mindset and our approach to help students with disabilities be successful in the classroom. We want to use support strategies that keep students engaged. We want to implement de-escalation strategies and regulate and rebuild after challenging behavior. I also want to touch on the fact that we as educators are here to initiate and welcome change so that we can best serve our students. When we know better, we do better. There's no shame in, thinking about something that you did previously and realizing, oh, maybe that wasn't the best thing. We just want to move forward in the future and with the information that we have and apply that so we can do the best for our kids. So we're going to go through 4 topics today. We're going to be going, the first topic is mindset. We're going to talk about engagement, de-escalation, and remaining relaxed and regulated. So before we get started with the actual material, I like to just take like 2 minutes and really reflect on our year so far. So if you have just a piece of paper with you, or you can write it in the chat, I just want us to reflect. I'm going to set a 2-minute timer, and I want us to write down what is something that is hard for you this year. What is something that you want to improve on? And what is your why? So if you can go ahead and put that in the chat or write it on a piece of paper, I'm going to go ahead and start the timer now. So in the chat, I'm hearing things like communicating effectively with staff, tone when speaking to staff and children.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. We've got some comments. Hannah, we've got language barriers, difficult students, someone's why, Let's see, we have improve upon better time management, getting
Yeah.
organized.
I can actually see it, Rhea. I
Okay.
figured out how to see the chat, which thank you, because I didn't think I was going to be able to.
You got to tell me how you did that.
Yes. Meeting staff where they are. Support a school life that continue to glow at home. That one's really important. Like, how can we get them to succeed beyond just school? Someone said, I agree with the defiant students being hard. We're going to talk about what defiance looks like or oppositional looks like and how we can kind of support those kids. Communication, I hear a lot. Somebody put their why, here for students and willingness to work with all students, no matter how difficult they may be at times. Amen. Okay. So that's my timer that went off. So thank you guys for sharing that with me. I really do appreciate that. And I think that sometimes we get just so caught up in our job and in what's going on that we really don't sit back and kind of reflect on just where we're at. Okay, so first topic we're talking about today is mindset. So the mindset that we have creates a huge impact on how we do our job. It's important that we have discussions about mindset with our entire team. So if you are an intervention specialist and you have paraprofessionals, you guys should be talking about what your mindset is, what your approach is towards supporting these students, because you guys all need to be on the same page and have those common values so that you guys can be like a cohesive unit there to support the kids. And that also helps create like a better communication system between the adults in the room as well. So my mindset that I always had when I'm in the classroom and that I always share with staff is all centered around presuming competence and presuming potential within students. So before I talk about what those things mean, I want us to just stop and think for a second. If a student is met with a set of predetermined expectations based on a diagnosis, doesn't it rob them of the opportunity to demonstrate ability? So I know that we work with tough kids, and there's a lot of times when we get a student that because of their diagnosis or because of what happened to them in the past, we don't even give them the chance to show us those skills. I like to tell people that presuming competence means that we assume that this student with a disability or this student who needs a lot of support, when we look at them, we assume that they can do anything that their peers can do. So if this is a third grader, we assume that this third grader with disabilities can do everything that all the other third graders can do. That's what it means to presume competence. And then we know that presuming potential is when we presume competence, we presume that they can do all these things. Ultimately, we're going to learn some things. We're going to learn a lot of skills that they have, but we're also going to learn skills that they don't have yet. And presuming potential is when they show us something that they can't do, we presume that we can teach them the skills they need to do that task, or at least participate in the task. So we want to set the bar high for these kids because that shows that we respect them. So when we think about our students who are non-speaking, for example, we should always be speaking directly to that kid because they hear us, right? I've seen so many times adults just talk over kids because they assume that this kid isn't listening or can't hear them or doesn't understand. We have to presume that they do understand and that they communicate intentionally. I love to give the example. I had a student who had an AAC device, and for probably 2 months, and I gave this example the last time I presented, for probably 2 months, he said Mad River on his AAC device. And nobody knew what that meant. And it was like around Christmas, we thought maybe it was Mad River Mountain. Like, we're just trying to understand. And he would just hit all day long, river, 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 mad river, mad river. And it turns out 2 months later, one of my paraprofessionals said, Hannah, did you hear him? He said, want Mad River music. And I'm like, oh, and she's like, it's the River radio station. So he was communicating to us for months, but we just thought that he was stimming or that he was just hitting buttons just to hit it. We really have to dig and try to gain meaning behind everything that our students are doing, behind their behavior, behind what they're communicating to us. Another example of presuming competence is I see a lot of times students with multiple disabilities using the handicap restroom, even though some of those students, of course, they need that and they need the accommodations in there. But when we look at students who, have no physical needs or motor needs and can go to the restroom independently, of course, they should go in the regular bathroom. Someday, when they work at a job, that's going to be the expectation. Or when they're out in the community, that's going to be the expectation. So we presume that they use the regular restroom just like anybody else would. Same with walking a student, to their destination. A lot of times I see paraprofessionals walking right next to a student or walking hand in hand with the student when the student is going somewhere like lunch or recess. Students will surprise you. A lot of times they know how to get there and they know what they're doing. So hang back and see if they can do it on their own. It's all about giving them the opportunity. And then if they don't achieve that or they can't do it on their own, it's all about the teaching. So next we'll talk about mindset in relation to it being student-centered. So this is the mindset that my staff has always shared with each other. Every child is capable of learning, and it's our job to hold ourselves accountable for our own behavior and our own actions. So we can't control student behavior. The only behavior that we can control is our behavior and hope that that influences student behavior. So ultimately, it's all about control what you can control. Our behavior is what we can control. We can control our behavior, our actions, our language, our response, our instruction, the support we give. And there's no sense of putting that on the kid, right? Because that's just going to lead you to feel frustrated. So we need to take accountability for ourselves and realize that if something isn't working, we need to change. When I was growing up, I played softball, and I had this pitching coach who used to say all the time, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. If we show up every day and we try to do the same thing with this kid or teach them in the same way and they're not succeeding, it's never going to change. So we know that if they're showing challenging behavior, what can we do? How can we change? What support can we give? And if a student is struggling to learn something like an academic skill, it's our teaching strategies that must change. Okay. I love this meme. A behavior specialist actually shared this with me a while ago, but it says, perhaps his behavior has not changed because your behavior has not changed, but that's none of my business. So we can change and control language, behavior, instruction, prompts, response, actions, and hope that in turn we see change in student behavior. Okay, so we know and expect that we will see challenging behavior. Our students are not going to succeed all the time. We're also going to see just mistakes like academic mistakes or them, scoring low or not doing as well on different tests and things like that. We have to understand that every mistake or error or challenging behavior is a teachable moment and an opportunity for them to succeed. When we start framing our mindset like this, it keeps not just us sane, but it also gives the student the opportunity to practice the correct skill. The whole point of school, essentially, is to empower students and give them the skills they need to be independent, happy, and successful. So if a student keeps doing something incorrectly, that means that we haven't taught the skill enough. And that means that they need more support. If we want, students to learn how to do this skill, they're going to need to be taught how to do it. They're going to need you to model how to do it. So if at first they don't succeed, there are just 3 steps. We want to teach and model the skill, let the student try it on their own, and then praise them. And implementing things in this manner provides them immediate feedback. So we're not waiting until the end of the day and then saying, oh, earlier, you shouldn't have thrown that chair. Immediately in that moment, we're going to make the correction and deal with it right then and there, because we don't hold grudges, right? And giving them that immediate feedback lets them apply it right away, and then they can practice doing the right thing. With this comes, another piece of mindset that students have an inherent desire to succeed. So we need to give them the tools to do that. And we need to build their confidence, which means we have to give them more opportunities. So here are some examples of how we can kind of turn mistakes or challenging behavior into teachable moments. So I'm going to just read a couple of my examples, but if you would like to give, a mistake that your students make or a challenging behavior that you guys have, maybe we can together think of how we can make that into a teachable moment. Feel free to share those things in the chat. You guys can respond to each other, and I'll try to read some of them as well. So an example of student mistake or behavior. This is something that I had a student who would do this all the time. He would sprint down the hallway into the classroom, and then he would just go to the break space and take out all the toys and just throw them all over the break space. And so my response to that, I remain calm, and I just say, when we come into the classroom, we have walking feet like this, and I will walk and model it, and we just sit in our seat. So let's practice. So I'll take the student back in the hallway. We're going to walk into the classroom with me, and then they're going to sit in their seat. And immediately I'm going to tell them, good job walking in the classroom and sitting down. You're showing me you're ready to learn. I love that. So the student did something that we didn't want or expect. I responded and showed them what we do want and what we do expect. I let the student practice that, and I praised them. Now, of course, if they threw all the toys all over the room or all over the break space, the logical consequence before we do any of this is just going to be to have them pick it up. And like I said, we're trying not to hold on to things. Sandy said, when third graders are not writing correctly, we take a break to write letters on a dry erase board. It makes them feel better when they finally write correctly. That's great. I love that example. I also included another example on here of, some challenging behavior that I've had to deal with. So student throwing desks and chairs all over the room. My response to that is, okay, I don't want them to do that, but I do know that they need to get this out of their system. So I'm going to say something like, I see you're upset about something. Here's all these soft items, and let's throw these at the wall. And the student's going to throw all those objects that are a lot safer and are in, a more safe environment. And I'll say to them, good, let's throw these as hard as we can. So we're just trying to get them to do what is most appropriate and kind of just turn that into a teachable moment for them. Okay. I also like to touch on trauma whenever I do presentations, because especially for students who are non-speaking or students who have communication needs, most times they literally are not at a point where they can share any of that with us. Then we think about students who can communicate, but they might not be comfortable sharing that with us, or they might not have the words to express what's going on. And we know from research that students with trauma create chaos for comfort. When things are chaotic or even times, stressful and loud, that is comfortable for them. What they go through at home, if it is chaos, is kind of their baseline. And that's what's comfortable. When things are too calm, that's uncomfortable for them. And though we want to get them to a place where they can be calm, and that can become comfortable, that takes time. And there's a book called What Happened to You? It's by Dr. Bruce Perry, who is a trauma expert, and he actually co-writes it with Oprah. So it's a really easy read for everybody. But I love the approach of this book, and I really do feel like it shifted my approach when I work with kids. The whole premise is whenever kids do something and our kind of first thought is like, what's wrong with you? Right? It's why would you do that? We have to shift our question and shift our focus to what happened to you. No child enters the classroom as a blank page. So what has happened to them before that moment influences how they behave, respond, act, talk, all those things. When they're young, all these things are programmed for them. And that's why they're demonstrating these things, right? So this is also, I saw somebody's comment about Kermit the Frog. So yes, I will share that at the end. But talking about what happened to you and turning to wonder when we see students who are engaging in challenging behavior or who are saying things that they shouldn't be. Turning to wonder is what is going to help us get to the root of that. So in order to adopt this trauma lens, there are a couple of things we can do every day to help support these students. We can give them a fresh start and a clean slate every day. Like I mentioned before, we do not hold grudges against kids. And I get it. It can be hard out there. And you know that if this student has been struggling, all 4 days this week and it's Friday and you're like, I don't know if I can do this another day. We have to just assume the best and presume the best because that's what gives them the most opportunities and also lets us show up ready to support them. We want to build the relationship. We want to be an active listener. Students want to tell you about themselves. They want you to ask about them and their interests and their goals. And it's really important to be an active listener, remember what they say and ask them about it, encourage them, build them up. We also need to show empathy, even when it's hard. We need to provide reinforcement and praise. So even when a student messes up, there's always going to be an opportunity for them to succeed. And with that opportunity to succeed comes the praise and comes the reinforcement. I really love this statistic. So when we talk about praise, everybody, all students need praise. All adults need praise. We all need praise. We all need that positive feedback. And when we give corrective feedback, so corrective feedback is ultimately just like negative feedback. So if a student makes a mistake or we have to correct them for something, if we do that one time, it takes 5 positive interactions and 5 positive statements to counteract the one negative one. So I always give the example, like if I went out to dinner and I was with my friends and I was like, oh, do you like my shirt? And they're like, oh, I don't like that at all. Like, that's really ugly. It would probably take 5 other people telling me, hey, I like your shirt for me to ever wear that shirt again. Like we hold on to those negative things and it takes a lot for people to build that back up. And for students who have been through trauma, when we give one corrective statement or 1 ounce of negative feedback, it actually doubles and it takes 10 positive statements to counteract the one. Because they're used to being beaten down or they're used to, being talked to in that manner. So it's really important that we seek out every opportunity to build them up. We can compliment their character, compliment their actions, and just try to find things every day that we can praise them for. Okay, so this is something that I liked to do in my classroom that my whole team would implement. And it was really easy because I truly feel that the tone for the day starts in the first 2 minutes that kid walks in the door. So every day I would greet and connect with my students within the first 2 to 5 minutes that they got there. So we can do this just by giving our student our undivided attention, just for, 5 seconds. Looking them in the eye and being close to them and saying, I'm so happy to see you today. I'm so happy you're here today. I love to see you smiling this morning. Let's start off by hanging up your coat and putting your backpack up and just getting off to a good day. Just taking that time to start things on that positive note makes a huge difference. And sometimes it sounds redundant. Like every day my students would walk in and I'd be like, I'm so happy you're here. I can't wait. We're going to have a great day today. And sometimes you might feel a little silly doing it, but it goes a really long way. Another really powerful thing that we did was, and for background, all of my students were non-speaking. I'd say 90% of my students were non-speaking. And when my students would walk in, just because they're non-speaking, doesn't mean that they're not going to greet each other. I would always see my students walking in and giving each other high fives or thumbs up or getting their talkers, and just trying to connect with their friends and trying to give them time to do that. Giving like 5-10 minutes at the beginning of the day for them to connect with their friends is going to help them be able to engage later on. So we want to greet them, and then we want to connect with them. When we connect with them, we are doing like a daily check-in, like, are your physical needs met? Are your emotional needs met? Social needs met? When I connected with my students, I had them fill in a morning check-in sheet, and I would have them fill out, how am I feeling today? What's one thing I'm excited about for today? And then I would have them circle, what do I need to be ready to learn? And this is a really powerful statement. What do you need to be ready to learn? Do you need water? Do you need exercise? Do you need a snack? Do you need, to spend some time and connect with somebody? Trying to let the students advocate for themselves and understand their own needs gives them the accountability to advocate for themselves in the future and advocate for their own needs. So I just made, a sheet with visuals on it that I had the kids fill out every morning. And that gave them an opportunity to share with me kind of where they're coming from. I also recited a daily affirmation with the students. I had a mirror in my classroom, and I would change the affirmation every week to something else. But when my students got there, that was the first thing we did in the morning, is I would say with them, I am a leader. I am healthy. I have friends who love me. And we would practice this every day, and it really does help them connect. Another thing we can do is practice a regulation strategy if the student comes in dysregulated. Sometimes when that student gets off the bus, you're like, oh, geez. And that's the perfect opportunity to, before the day even starts, we can pick a regulation strategy like going for a walk, drawing, doing something that they enjoy, taking time to just talk to them. But every single day, we want to aim to greet every student individually and do one thing to strengthen our relationship with every student. Okay, so next we're going to talk about engagement and the word compliance. And before we dive into this, I just want everybody to think to themselves, we're all adults, and we have to think like, are we compliant? Do we do everything that we're told? And understanding that, compliance and obeying, right, is not always the best thing for kids. We want to focus on engagement because compliance involves like blindly following a set of rules. And we want our students to be engaged. We want them to want to learn. We want them to want to participate. And compliance essentially, is a much harder target, right, than engagement. And it doesn't lead to those long-term results like engagement would. Okay, so before we talk about that, let's just think about when a student is not engaged, or this is what some people would call, defiant or oppositional. We need to turn to curiosity. This is when we start asking ourselves these questions. We start asking ourselves, why, right? Why does this student say they don't want to do this? Why is this student not participating? And we have to investigate. And sometimes we just need to ask them. I know for me, my students would say, this is too hard. Or I have to go to the bathroom. Or I don't want to do it next to this person, right? Sometimes they might be able to give you feedback on why they're not engaged or why they don't want to do something. And I just like to reiterate that going back to, blaming the student for not doing something by saying to ourselves, they don't care, they can't, they don't want to, it's not a good enough answer because we're not getting anything out of that, right? What goes back to the definition of insanity. We're just going to keep doing the same thing over and over again and assume that the student is failing because they don't care, or they don't want to, or they can't, right? We need to change something about what we're doing, and that requires us to dig deeper. We also have to ask ourselves what skills are they missing? So what do they find aversive about the task? What do they need to be successful right now? A lot of times we see that students don't want to do something because they don't have the skills to do so. And that's when we give them the support, the models, whatever they need to succeed. And then what do they find aversive about the task? It might be the location. It might be the people they're with. What about it is aversive to them? And then what do they need to be successful right now? Who cares about the whole packet of papers? What do they need to do to answer this one question correctly? Or what do they need to do, to participate in this one activity right now? And then we also need to ask, how can I support them? How can I ensure they succeed? And how can I modify the task so they can succeed? So these are all questions that we need to turn to. I see somebody in the chat had said, when the child answers bluntly that they simply don't want to, how do you approach that without being harsh or causing further disruption? And we're going to talk about that when we talk about autonomy and student choice. So that's a wonderful question. Thank you. Okay. And then I also like to just throw this in there and as a reflection point, maybe your student isn't non-compliant. Maybe they're not feeling safe with you. They're not feeling safe in general in their life. They're unable to communicate feelings, needs, wants. So this especially goes for students who are non-speaking. Sometimes, if a student is refusing to do a task, there might be something else going on, but they have no other communication right now other than to say, I don't want to do this. It may be that their needs are not met. Needs go beyond, food and water, but they also go to love and safety and belonging and feeling like they're good enough and that they're capable and they're worthy. And maybe we haven't earned their trust. So next we're going to just talk about the difference between compliance and compliant and engaged. And we've talked about this, a little bit up until this point, but if you guys could just share in the chat for the next 30 seconds, how do you define compliance? I see doing what you were told to do, following directions, doing what you're asked to do, complying with rules and regulations, do an activity without resistance, following rules that are set, okay. Someone said compliant is like old school obedience. Awesome. Okay, thank you guys. Those are all really awesome definitions of compliance. And to me, compliance is doing something because someone told you to do it. So I want us to now talk about what does it mean to be engaged. So go ahead and write in the chat, what do you think it means to be engaged? I see actively involved in what they're asked to do. Participating. Hands-on. Excited to be learning. Active. And I see the common words here are like involved, motivated, participating, enjoying what they're doing. And I love all of your guys' definitions for this: caring, active, and excited, focused on the subject matter at hand. Awesome. So these are all wonderful definitions. And to me, engagement is the mutual understanding of the value to completing a task. Engagement requires student buy-in, right? And at the end of the day, our goal, our overall goal, is we want students to be engaged. We want students to want to learn. That is the ultimate, success as a teacher, right? And I like to give the example, like when I first started teaching, I had a student and I used a token board. And by the time, I was 3 years in, never once have I used a token board again. And that's because I'm constantly gauging, and I try to avoid extrinsic rewards for this reason, because I think to myself, what am I doing that's not engaging this kid? How can I get them engaged? And when you get them engaged, you don't need all this extra reinforcement, right? And reinforcement can be powerful and it can be a good thing. And there's absolutely a place for it. But true engagement with true student buy-in is the most powerful of them all. So really, I just want us to make sure that we all have the mindset of engagement is the goal. Compliance, obedience, doing something because someone told you to do it isn't the goal. Doing something because you understand why it should be done is engagement. Okay. I also like to touch on the fact that learning is only possible after students' social, emotional, and physical needs are met. So until students have those needs met, they are not ready to learn. And they're not going to do, or they're not going to perform to the level you want them to perform. And things that we can ask ourselves are, how can we show students they belong and that they're connected? How can we give students the tools they need to regulate themselves? How can we teach students to communicate their needs? How can we teach students to advocate when their needs have not been met? And this was the example I'd given earlier of that statement, what do you need to be ready to learn? And that puts it on the student, right? What do you need? And how can you communicate to me those needs so that we make sure that you're ready to learn? Because once those needs are met, they will be ready. And some tips for this is just to provide access to, water and snacks, build them up with constant, frequent, positive language. There's stats out there that say effective teachers should be giving praise to students like 3 to 5 times every minute or two. So when we're working with them and engaging with them one-on-one, we need to constantly be praising them and building them up. We need to focus on building relationships with students. We need to be an active listener when they share things with you. Listen to them. They want you to care. Create opportunities for peers to build relationships with each other, especially for our students with multiple disabilities and students with disabilities in general. The first line of, interaction and everything and support should be peers. The whole goal for us as adults is to be able to stand in the back of the room and just watch our students with disabilities engaging with their peers. I mean, that's the ultimate goal. And sometimes though, we need to go in and we need to support those opportunities so that we can take the step back. And then we want to give students the skills they need to advocate for themselves. And whenever I go over this, I also like to touch on the fact that our students with disabilities, our students with challenging behavior, they watch themselves fail all the time. They let others watch them fail, and they need all of you to be that person for them that makes them feel like they can succeed and they do succeed. Okay, so this is where I like to talk about autonomy and how that increases engagement and why this is such an effective strategy for students who are, quote, defiant or oppositional, right? So autonomy allows students to take ownership over their own learning. This is a really powerful antecedent strategy to prevent problem behavior specifically for these students that we're talking about, right? I know that everybody has had at least one student out there who says no to everything. Can you go line up? No, right? How can they say no to something though that they choose? So this prevents the power struggle, because instead of the power struggle, we're empowering them to make their own choices about their day, about their activity, about how they do something. And at the end of the day, they're going to complete the task. We're just interested in how they're going to complete that task and give them control over how they do that. So, as anybody does, students crave autonomy, just like adults do. Like, we're constantly telling students what to do and when to do it. And that can be really frustrating for kids. You know, we don't have somebody as adults who's following us around our workday and telling us, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this, right? There's autonomy. You can make choices for yourself. And we need to focus on student autonomy, not only to, you know, prevent this challenging behavior, but to increase engagement, and also like teach students that their opinions matter and their words have value. And this is something that can increase communication skills for those with communication needs as well. It helps promote independence, and it helps teach decision-making skills. So when we're focusing on student autonomy, we're asking for students' opinion, we're getting their feedback, and essentially we have a task we want them to do. And we're going to present this task as a choice. And this is sometimes referred to as forced choice. And it can look like this. So we can give students the power to decide how to do it. So do you want to write with a pencil or a marker? Do you want to run back into the school or walk? How many math problems are you going to do? Are you going to do 5 or 10? Which order are you going to do it in? Do you want to do the front? Do you want to do the front first or the back? Do you want to do your sound card warm up first, or do you want to read your story? When do you want to do it? So do you want to do it right now, or do you want to do it after we finish this book? Where do you want to do it? Do you want to do it on the floor, at the table, you know, at a different desk, on the bean bags? And who to do it with? Like, do you want to do it with Miss Rogers? Do you want to do it with Miss Smith? Who do you want to participate in this activity with? And like I mentioned before, this is all about letting them make the choice so they feel like they're in control. Okay. At the end of the day, it comes down to 3 things. We want to find stressors. What in their life is triggering them, right? And we want to reduce that. So for example, like if your student is really stressed whenever they get called on in class, that's a stressor for them. And maybe it sets them off of it. So let's try to reduce that. Instead of the teacher calling on them in class, maybe they can hold up a whiteboard that has the response on it because they don't like talking in front of everybody. And trying to take notice of things that are stressors for them. This could be something like the environment that they're in, a certain location, the people that they're interacting with, or noises. Finding unmet needs. So unmet needs are things that we've talked about, like, you know, water, food, love, belonging, understanding, communication, and just try to meet those needs and understand, you know, what needs aren't being met, and let the students have the opportunity to share that with you. And then last is finding skill deficits. Students want to succeed. And a lot of times it goes back to them not having a skill. So we need to teach them that skill. And sometimes it might be, you know, if you're asking them to do a math problem, they may know how to do that math problem. So that might not be the skill deficit. The skill deficit might be, you know, something else going on of, you know, a need isn't met, something's stressing them, right? So you have to kind of figure out how those things intertwine as well. And skill deficits also for our students who are non-speaking might be being unable to communicate what they want. And that's why communication is so important. Okay, so we're going to talk about de-escalation. So when we see a student who's escalated, this looks like a student who's screaming, crying, engaging in aggressive behavior. And this is my favorite quote that I include in almost every presentation. And I think this is really important when we start talking about challenging behavior. There's no such thing as a bad kid. just angry, hurt, tired, scared, confused, impulsive ones, expressing their feelings the only way they know how. We owe it to every single one of them to always remember that. So we have to remember, they're not giving us a hard time. They're having a hard time. We need to be that safe adult for them. And I will be the first to admit, it is hard. When you're dealing with challenging behavior and you're dealing with kids who are escalated and the energy is just up here, it can be tough. And my team, you know, when I was a teacher, we had some students with really aggressive behavior and challenging behavior. And we ended up just coming up with a mantra. And for us, we would just have to tell ourselves, like, I can help most when I am calm. Because when a kid starts being escalated, it's so easy to get caught in this trap of like, oh my gosh, if they would just stop, or what's wrong with them, or like, you know, you start going into this pattern of negative thinking, and you just have to remind yourself, I can help most when I'm calm. It's really easy, I will say as well, it's really easy to get caught up in the chaos. And, you know, like I had somebody tell me before, when they get louder, you get calmer. And you're trying to model the energy and the behavior that you want to see in them. And so when your tone remains calm, your demeanor remains calm, you're trying to show them and bring them back down to that level, right? But when you join in on the chaos, it makes them just even more escalated. So repeat to yourselves, I can help most when I am calm. So when a student is escalated, we have to remember the focus is on de-escalating them. It's not on solving the problem. It's not on delivering the consequence. It's on getting them to a de-escalated state. I have this triangle on here, and this is basically how our brain processes. So these are the different parts of our brain. And at the bottom, we have our brainstem. And our brain processes from the bottom up. So when a student is escalated, they're still trying to regulate the brainstem. So that's temperature, respiration, cardiac, right? They physically cannot access the thinking part of their brain. The thinking part of your brain is at the top, and that's where creativity, thinking, values, hope, and even towards the top in your limbic is reward, memory, bonding, emotions. When a student is so escalated, they're just trying to focus on the brainstem and regulate that. So it is physically, you know, not possible sometimes for the student to access the thinking part. And that's why we don't bring up the problem. We don't bring up the consequence. We're focused on de-escalating. So think to yourselves, you know, what does escalated look like for your students? And remembering that when that happens, our focus is on de-escalating them. So we're going to talk about some ways that we can de-escalate our students and support them. So let's talk about what not to do first, right? So things we're not going to do. We're not going to say, calm down, stop doing that. Why are you doing that? We're not going to bring up a consequence. We're not going to use blame and judgmental language like you're being bad or disrespectful. We're not going to compare the student to others who are behaving better. We're not engaging in power struggles to win control. We're not raising our voice. We're not rolling our eyes. We're using lengthy explanations to correct problem behavior. We're not doing that. And we're also not going to talk to students or talk about the student to others as if they aren't there. This is like a true pet peeve of mine. You know, if a student is so escalated, they're clearly having a hard time, and other kids are in the room or walking by, and you're saying, oh, he's, you know, just being so disrespectful right now. Nobody look at him, all these things. We're just drawing more attention to that kid, and it's disrespectful to that kid in their, you know, time of need and something that they're really going through. And we're not going to reason with the student using bribes or empty threats. So we're not saying things like, if you calm down, I'll give you the iPad, right? Because that doesn't solve anything. So let's focus on what we will do. We are going to show compassion and empathy. Remember, when they get louder, we get calmer. We're going to remain calm and address the person before the problem. So I see you're feeling this. I see you're feeling frustrated. That must have been hard. We're going to offer help and support. How can I help you? What do you need? I'm here for you. We're going to label their emotion and validate their feelings. I see you're feeling upset. That sounds really frustrating. Sometimes all a kid needs is some silence and personal space. And this is kind of an underrated one. Something else that's important is talk less. I always tell people, talk less, touch less. They don't need all that input, especially during that time. We want to point out the positives, give students the expected choice that they can make, and practice a coping skill together. So the last part of our presentation is going to talk about what it means to be relaxed and engaged. So So we talked about what it looks like when we have a student who's escalated and how we can de-escalate them. And then after that student is de-escalated, how can we get back to this state of being relaxed and regulated so that we can be engaged? These are like the perfect conditions for learning, right? So something important after we deal with any challenging behavior, I want everybody to reflect on our own behavior and apologize if necessary. So we need to normalize apologizing to children when we as adults mess up. We all mess up. And sometimes, like I said, sure, we want to remain calm and we want to de-escalate them. And we talked about the things not to do. We all slip up. Sometimes, we may have yelled, or sometimes we may have done something we regret. We can apologize. And when we apologize to children, we demonstrate that it's okay to make mistakes. We remind them that they deserve respect. We teach them how to apologize effectively. We repair and strengthen our relationships with them, and we reestablish safety and trust with them. We're going to be wrong sometimes. We're going to mess up sometimes, and that's okay. There's no shame in apologizing, but rather there's power. This is something I like to address as well, because I actually have gotten this comment, while I was a teacher, of being like soft. And we have to remind ourselves, you are not weak or soft because you're empathetic. Speak softly or refrain from using typical punitive practices. It takes strength to prioritize peace, set emotion aside, and put students' needs first during the challenging moments. Once you do this, you realize that was a whole lot harder than just yelling at them and moving on, right? There's so much power in this, which also comes, with so much strength. So finally, we de-escalated them. So now what? So after we go through all that, we may have apologized. We're just in a space where they're de-escalated and ready to talk. So here are the important things that we're going to do after that. We're going to co-regulate. So regulation strategies that we can do with them, if we are available, are going for a walk, drinking water, drawing, breathing exercises, any rhythmic activities, listening to music. And this is something, a student can do on their own, or you can do it with them, but we want to regulate in some way. But the key point here is we can provide these options and model it for them, but they need to make their own choice. They need to engage in a regulation activity because they want to. I hate when people are like, oh, do some deep breaths. Like, that student doesn't want to do deep breaths. They would tell you if they did. So that can be an option, or sure, you can model that for them, but ultimately we need their buy-in. We want to talk calmly and privately about what happened. We should not be discussing challenging behavior in front of other people. We need to stick to the facts, use restorative language, and listen to the students' input about the situation. We need to decide what will happen next, which is a logical consequence, and we're going to talk about that in the next couple slides. We need to agree to the next steps, so we need student buy-in to the logical consequence and have a plan for next time. So these are the 4 things we need to do, and the final and most important thing to me that we need to do is remind them that you are proud of them, you're here for them, and you want to help them succeed, and then we move on. So restorative and judgmental language, there's a big difference here. So judgmental language focuses on the person being the problem. It focuses on control and it focuses on punishments. Judgmental language sounds like, why did you do that? How could you? Now you need to think about what you've done. Okay. Restorative language focuses on the problem, not the person. It focuses on accountability and honesty. It focuses on moving forward and teaching the skill. So whenever you're like recapping after an student who has escalated, now they're de-escalated, you're trying to go through these steps, you need to use restorative language that sounds like, what happened? What were you feeling? Who have you hurt with that choice? And what can you do to make it right? So discipline is helping a child solve a problem. Punishment is making a child suffer for having a problem. To raise problem solvers, focus on solutions, not retributions. And I feel like throughout this presentation, I've tried to stress, we are solution focused. We want them to succeed. We want them to have the skills they need. So the last thing we're going to talk about today is consequences. So logical consequences are logically related to the behavior. So a consequence is anything that happens after a behavior. It can be good, bad. It doesn't really have, connotation, but it's whatever happens next. So when we're delivering a consequence, like after, challenging behavior or something, we have to keep a couple things in mind. It needs to be related to the behavior. It needs to be respectful. It needs to be reasonable. And it needs to be helpful. Helpful is the key here. The consequence helps better a behavior, and we use it as a teaching tool. So these are examples of logical consequences. A student makes a mess or destroys an area of the room, they're going to clean it and fix it. And remember, we're not bringing this up while they're escalated. When they're de-escalated, we talk about the consequence. If a student keeps waving their scissors in the air, the consequence is you can't use them. They hit another student, they apologize, talk through how that made the other person feel, decide what to do in the future, practice having a gentle body with that person and giving them a light tap, and maybe having to move their chair back so that they're not in anybody else's personal space. These are all examples of logical consequences that are tied to the behavior. And then we have illogical consequences, which is punishment. And the difference here is that punishment is always imposed by an adult, and it's typically unrelated to the offense. It's punitive and it asserts power. So an example of punishments that are given to students are things like taking away recess for destroying the room in the morning. Recess is unrelated to destroying the room. And we didn't do anything to help them better their behavior, help them in the future. Giving a student a timeout in the hallway for throwing things. Taking a toy from a student at recess. So if a student takes a toy from another student at recess and making them come inside and sit in the classroom. An example of a logical consequence for that is we could teach the student to ask how to share with somebody. And maybe they need to stay away from this student for a couple minutes. Or we're just trying to find where can the learning experience be? Okay. And I just want to mention, relaxed students, regulated students equals engaged students. And that's why I picked the title for this presentation. At the end of the day, these are the conditions our kids need to be engaged. So if you guys could just take maybe the next 30 seconds or so and just go in the chat and say, what is your biggest takeaway from this training? I know this was a lot of information, and I'm sorry if it felt rushed, but I'm really interested on your biggest takeaway or something that you feel is relevant to you and your practice.
There's some really good comments. Yep. Focus on the student and not the behavior. That's a really big one.
Treat kids the way they need to be treated, not the way we want to treat them. Love that one.
The mantra, I can help most when I'm calm.
These are really wonderful. And I swear, guys, being calm is what keeps us sane. Wow, these are great. So I'm gonna keep reading the chat, but I'm gonna go ahead to the end here, just because I have some resources on here. So I had mentioned the book What Happened to You that talks about trauma. And really like how we're wired and how we grow up is what shapes who we are today. Hacking School Discipline is about restorative justice and restorative discipline. And then in this day and age, I know sometimes people don't always want to read a book or a research article. So for me, I've been able to follow like these professionals that I really respect on Instagram. And sometimes that can be a really accessible way for people to get small bits of information quickly. And so I just included 5 Instagram accounts on here that really share a lot of tools about communication, supporting students with disabilities, and behavior management. So I'm going to leave those on there. And that's about it for me. So thank you guys. And thank you for the hard work that you do. You are so appreciated and you have the power to make a difference.